This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name is Evan Jansen. The show, of course, live, broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with our whole show available on demand on our YouTube channel. Now, on the show today, we look at the latest developments in the Dewani murder case before the Western Cape High Court. Convicted Nigerian terrorist Henry Okah will today appear before the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein to appeal against his conviction and sentence there. In our book slots, we ask the question, is Africa being looted by its so-called allies? That should be interesting. We also get an update on the now viral #Dagga debate, and we close by looking at corporate social responsibility. But first, here is the day's news with Katrine Milan.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrine Milan, and let's take a look at the news making headlines this morning. Public Enterprises Minister Lynn Brown says a plan is in the making for Eskom's financial and operational recovery. Brown says Eskom and others will be required to make an extraordinary effort over the next 3 to 4 years. New Eskom CEO Tsiriso Matona says the power utility is facing a crisis. Announcing interim financial results, he said profit for the 6 months to September declined to 9.3 billion rand from 12.2 billion rand last year.
We will need another serious look at Eskom's financial sustainability. Ultimately, I think it's going to require cost-reflective tariff.
Municipal by-elections are taking place across the country today. 81 candidates will contest 31 wards. IEC officials have been collecting special votes from the sick and elderly ahead of today's voting. Nearly 500,000 voters are registered in the 633 voting districts involved today. The National Assembly's Programme Committee is meeting today to finalise the programme for tomorrow's sitting called by Speaker Baleka Mbete to conclude outstanding business. The Programme Committee is the parliamentary structure that takes the final decision on what should be on the agenda during a House sitting. The reconvening of the House follows last Thursday's 7-hour delay in proceedings. Opposition parties are said to be furious about being called back to Parliament by Mbete for the half-hour session tomorrow. Members of Parliament are conducting oversight work across the country, and recalling them comes at great cost.
Our position is very, very clear. We want a date when the President will come and answer questions this year.
All opposition parties were saying that the program which the ANC was proposing was ridiculous. They've recalled members from oversight to come back on Thursday for 25 minutes on things that really are not even necessary.
It means the opposition parties, they are united in this, that they don't want people to be held accountable. So that is why they are protesting against this sitting on Thursday.
Palestinian lobby groups have called on the South African government to join the global campaign for a boycott and on trade sanctions against Israel. The call has been made ahead of the meeting between President Jacob Zuma and his Palestinian counterpart Mahmoud Abbas at the Union Buildings in Pretoria this morning. Abbas is on his first state visit to South Africa, a trip which will culminate in the signing of a key bilateral agreement to bolster political ties between Palestine and Pretoria. And hundreds of U.S. National Guard troops have taken up positions in the streets of Ferguson in Missouri in an effort to avoid a repeat of Monday night's violence. Residents of the St. Louis suburb woke up to scenes of devastation yesterday after the destruction of a dozen buildings. The rioting followed a grand jury's decision not to prosecute a white policeman for the fatal shooting of unarmed black teenager Michael Brown. 61 people were arrested. Ferguson Mayor James Knowles has called for all necessary resources to protect residents as the world is watching.
Many of our residents, business owners, and citizens are asking for prayers during this time of unrest. We truly understand that the world is watching, both the city of Ferguson and the St. Louis region, as well as the state of Missouri.
Remember, all those top stories and more are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Thank you, Katrine. Shrien Dewani will know on the 8th of December whether all charges will be dropped against him in the Western Cape High Court. Deputy Judge President Jeanette Traverso said she would deliver her verdict on this day unless she lets the parties know otherwise. Dewani's legal team brought their application last week in terms of Section 174 of the Criminal Procedures Act, which opened up the way for a discharge if the court believed there was no credible evidence at the close of the state's case. If Shrien Dewani ultimately walks out free, there will obviously be more questions than answers. Now, for an update, we are joined by our reporter Vanessa Puna from our Cape Town studio, who've been on this case from day one. Very good morning to you, Vanessa.
Good morning to you, Eben.
Vanessa, the last 2 days, the defence and the state were really hard at work trying to convince the Western Cape High Court about their case and the merits of that. What were the issues or the moments that stood out for you?
Eben, yes, the past 2 days, as you say, were very interesting in the Western Cape High Court. The defence, in its 127-page heads of argument for this application 174 of the Criminal Procedures Act, really went to town, if one were, nitpicking and going through with a fine-tooth comb the state's evidence that it's led in the trial of Shrien Dewani. There were 16 witnesses in all, but the star witness for the state, Zola Tongu's testimony, came under intense scrutiny on Monday when Advocate Francois van Zyl for Shrien Dewani went through his heads of argument. And what the defence really wants the court to find is that this witness is totally uncredible, that his version could not possibly be true. Yesterday we heard from the state advocate Adrian Mop conceding to a question by Judge Jeanette Traverso whether Zola Tongu is indeed the one on who the state's case rests. Advocate Mop said yes, indeed, he is the one on which the case rests, because he is the one, you would remember, that claimed that Shrien Dewani offered 15,000 rand to have his wife killed. So it was an interesting 2 days in court, Eben, where the defence went all out, almost as a last-ditch attempt to convince the judge to rule in their favour in this application 174, and the state, of course, then putting forth their version, why they believe that Shrien Dewani was a co-conspirator in this murder plot, why he, for example, according to the state, tried to divert attention away from Zola Tongu initially during the police investigation. And this, the state says, points to his involvement in the murder of his wife Annie in November 2010.
Vanessa, is the state's case really as weak as some media houses are reporting?
Even I've asked quite a number of legal experts whether this is so, also given the fact that the South African government, the NPA, actually won the extradition battle. They've managed to get Shrien Dewani here from the UK after a almost 3.5-year fight in the courts abroad. And what my question was is that why does the South African Police Service investigation into the murder come under such scrutiny now while the trial is underway in Cape Town? Why, for example, has the NPA been blasted for example, spending all the money to get Mr. Dewani here, and then in court, legal analysts and experts are saying, oh no, that they don't have a watertight case. The word lackluster has been used to describe the case that the state has put forth against Shrien Dewani. So it's very difficult to say at this point, Eben, whether or not the state may have a case. They are certainly arguing in this for that. From Judge Jeanette Traverso. They want the judge to believe that what Zola Tongu has testified to in court, that this is true. They want the judge to find that there's no way that Zola Tongu, with the help of Mondi Mbolombo, Nzwamadoda Kwabe and Klolile Mngeni, on their own concocted this plan to hijack Annie Dewani, to then put Tongu out of the car along with Shrien Dewani, and then to end up taking Annie Dewani into Khayelitsha and shooting her. And this is really what the state wants the judge to rule, that this can't possibly be true, that Shrien Dewani has to be involved somehow.
3 million rand is the number for the charter plane alone that brought him over to South Africa. And there's a real possibility that he doesn't even have to take to the stand in his own defense in this case. That says a lot, doesn't it?
It does, Eben, it does indeed. If the defence decides, if, for example, the judge does not rule in the defence's favour for this 174 application and the matter is not discharged, the defence does then have an option to either close their case or to call witnesses and put Shrien Dewani in the witness stand. If that does not happen, yes, you rightfully say, if they win this application, Shrien Dewani is free to go home. Also, he cannot be retried, and there's no way that the NPA could then appeal the 174 ruling. So I think this is what people out there want to know. Why was so much money spent on getting Shrien Dewani here in the first place if, for example, he may not be convicted in this case? And the answer is quite simple. There was a prima facie case against Shrien Dewani. The courts in the UK found too that there was a case that he has to answer. The state, however, is saying to the judge, listen, all we have from Mr. Dewani at this case is just his plea explanation, and that is not evidence to corroborate anything that his defence has put forward to the state witnesses. Mr. Adrian Mop yesterday said that unless Shrien Dewani comes and testifies himself, what exactly does the court have to go on in terms of his version? The state, however, on the other hand, has called 16 witnesses, 6 of them policemen, some of them quite senior. Also family members of Annie Dewani in the form of Snaya Mashru, her cousin, who was very close to her. And then, of course, the investigating officer, Paul Hendricks, are just among the 16 witnesses that the state has called. So, yes, the question will then be raised, and I'm certain that the NPA and all the relevant authorities will be questioned at length about why spend all this money, why fight this difficult fight for almost 4 years, and the result may not end up being what the NPA and the state had desired.
Vanessa, thank you very much for giving us your views and updating us, of course, on the 8th of December, the application. Well, Judge Traverso will give us her thoughts on the application. Let's just recap quickly then. In 2 weeks' time, Shrien Dewani will, of course, know his fate. That's when the Western Cape High Court Judge Janet Traverso is expected to rule on this application by his lawyers to dismiss the case against him. But the state wrapped up its arguments, insisting it has proven his involvement in his wife and his murder. It's now 4 years ago.
The state insists Sola Tongo's evidence points to Dewani's involvement. Advocate Adrian Mop conceded their case relies on Tongo's testimony. He claims Dewani offered 15,000 rand to have his wife killed. Mop described the planning of the murder as amateurish and almost comical were it not for the tragedy of Annie's death. He submitted the conspirators were not exactly an A-team of contract killers and were lured by money. When asked by the judge why Shrien Dewani was robbed during the hijacking, Mop exclaimed that it would have been strange for him to emerge from the event with all his trimmings intact. Mop also says Dewani had lied to his family about the contact he had with Tongo. Vanessa Puna, SABC News, Cape Town.
Well, we stay in the courts, but we go to Bloemfontein now, where convicted Nigerian terrorist Henry Okah will today appear before the Supreme Court of Appeal to appeal his conviction and sentence. Okah was jailed for 24 years by the South Gauteng High Court in Johannesburg in March of 2013. He was found guilty on 13 counts of terrorism, including engaging in terrorist activities, conspiracy to engage in terrorist activities, and delivering, placing and detonating an explosive device. The charges related to 2 car bombs in Abuja, Nigeria, in which 12 people were killed and 36 injured on the 1st of October 2010, the anniversary of the country's independence. Now, from Bloemfontein, we are joined by Ntakwana Ngatani, who is outside the Supreme Court of Appeal. A very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben.
Certainly a mouthful that I just put forward, but just tell us your expectation from court proceedings today.
Indeed, Eben, this morning as the appeal court sits here in Bloemfontein, we're expecting 5 judges in Court A, and these 5 judges will hear arguments both from Okah's side, counsel for Okah, the appellant, as well as the National Prosecuting Authority. And from today, we will then know, in a few days' time, we expect the decision of the appeal court in terms of what his application will be in front of this court this morning. Eben.
Ntakwana, if 2013, March 2013 is a year and a half away almost, it's a very long time. Can you just take us back and maybe recap for us why Henry Okah was convicted for 24 years and a little bit more detail as to what happened in this case.
Yeah, but you put it very succinctly. The court case that happened in the South Gauteng High Court in fact dealt with the issues surrounding events that culminated on the 1st of October in Nigeria. But the reason that Okah was tried here in South Africa, he is a permanent resident here in South Africa, but also Nigeria did not request his extradition because these acts happened in Nigeria. That's how we ended up hearing this trial here in South Africa, and that's how he ended up being convicted here in South Africa. He then appealed that sentence, and this is why we're here today. What he's saying is that South Africa does not have jurisdiction to have tried him in the first place. In his first application for the appeal, he also said there was duplication, but that was thrown out. The third count in terms of his seeking the appeal was on the grounds that the evidence that convicted him of threatening more terrorism acts was not sufficient. But this appeal court here today will hear the two counts. In fact, the first one being that South Africa does not have jurisdiction, but Judge Claassen in his judgment had said that under the UN treaty, any country can try acts of terrorism, and South Africa has in fact put itself in the map for doing that here on this case. And the second issue, of course, that we will then hear in the arguments will be whether or not the court will find that the evidence in front of the lower court, the high court, was sufficient to in fact find him guilty of these acts and the further threats of terrorism that he is supposed to have done.
Now, Ntakwana, I'm sure you've spoken to some experts in the run-up to this case. What are they saying? What are the chances of his appeal being viewed favorably in front of the appeals court?
Well, there are circumstances surrounding the appeal itself. First of all, he has not been a model prisoner even because in the period leading to this appeal case, he has been moved twice from correctional centers. First, he was moved from Leeuwkop and then finally to Kokstad, now where he is in a maximum security facility after 2 attempts of trying to escape with other prisoners from prison. The other issue in this appeal that perhaps may affect it is whether or not, in fact, he was or had the opportunity to mastermind these acts. We heard in the High Court that he had access to cell phones and had cell phone communication through which he may have talked to people that in fact perpetrated the acts, and this appeal court will in fact decide whether or not that evidence is sufficient to warrant the conviction that was done by the High Court. The other issue that may come to play here is the fact that he did not, as President Jonathan of Nigeria had asked, denounce that he was in fact, or that MEND, his organization, was involved in the acts, because at the time President Jonathan wanted the acts, or had said the acts had been perpetrated by northern Nigerian rebels, but he did not in fact agree with him or come out. Also, he did not testify in his own defense in the High Court. These are some of the issues that we may hear here in this appeal court when the National Prosecuting Authority speaks for itself in terms of the conviction, but also his appeal, or the counsel for his appeal, presents his case.
Thank you very much for that update. That's our reporter coming to you live from the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein. That's Ntakwana Ngatane. Of course, we're dealing with the appeal of convicted Nigerian terrorist, that is Henry Okah. That's before the Supreme Court of Appeal in the City of Roses today. We move on and we're going to national. It's been nothing but chaos on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri for the last 24 hours as people took to the streets over the decision by a grand jury not to indict a white police officer for the killing of an unarmed black teenager, young Michael Brown. Yesterday, as you can see, protest marches sprang up in cities across the United States amid a tense security operation in Ferguson, the Missouri town at the center of the country's racially charged standoff. The photos on screen are a reflection of Ferguson overnight, and it has not been a peaceful one. It's been labelled as a night of violence that has left much of the city there in ruins. 12 buildings were torched overnight, mind you. Let's have a look at the tweets with regards to what's been happening in Ferguson. It's a story that has racially polarized America and large sections of the wider world. Here are some of the views. Koi Fresco says, black teens are subjected relentlessly every day in America. White privilege is real. This country needs change now more than ever. #Ferguson. Con says, you know what savagery is? A legal system that allows black people to be murdered with total impunity. And that's at the heart of the problem. There seems justice is what the people want. The Pete Sheet says, the protesters continue to burn and loot in Ferguson. You know what these people need? A lecture on personal responsibility from Bill Cosby. Seriously, Pete? Are you for real? Then Grayson says, a system isn't broken. It was built this way. Indict America. Black Lives Matter. No justice, no peace. Grayson, that is a sentiment that many black people in America are faced with today. Marching for Mike Brown, New York City. Ferguson Instagram. That's a lot of angry people in the US this morning. Just move up that next picture. Let's have a look. There we have, of course, riot police. We know that very well here in South Africa. Anonymous says, this is what a police state looks like. Military helping police arrest protesters in Ferguson. Yes, more National Guardsmen have been sent over to deal with the uprising that is now in the town of Ferguson in Missouri. But let's take a look at some of the front pages from around the world. All eyes, of course, still on Ferguson in the United States today. There you'll see the Financial Times is reporting that the fallout in Ferguson is set to endure. Across the pond in Spain, papers have also pictures of the violent riots there on their front pages. And even the Jerusalem Post is going with that story today. This is more than 60 people have been arrested as protests continue to grow after a grand jury decision against indicting the police officer who fatally shot Michael Brown there. Those are some of the international headlines, and as you can see, most of it dealing with race hate and race violence that sprung up overnight in Ferguson, Missouri in the United States. Before we go to a break, let's just have a look at what's happening in our country back here today. Here in Johannesburg, the ANC Youth League will continue with its National Congress at UJ Soweto campus. Staying in Joburg, the Steve Biko Center for Bioethics and Wits University will host a discussion on the importance of the HPCSA's findings in the Wouter Basson case. This is sentencing proceedings in the Health Professionals Councils of South Africa's hearing into the conduct of apartheid-era chemical warfare expert Wouter Basson is expected to begin in Pretoria today. And in Parliament, the media will be briefed on the 2013-14 audit results of national and provincial government departments. That should be a very interesting one. Keep your eye out for that. You're watching Newsroom. We'll be back after a short little break.
Every time you call someone, you're not just reaching out to those you love, you're touching millions of lives. Because when you connect through us, we empower others by linking our technology to education. Together, we connect teachers from 893 schools to 40 teacher centers nationally. We connect over 60,000 teachers to teaching tools on our online hub,
giving us the power to teach maths and science to our kids in exciting new ways.
So here's to belonging to a network that gives power to people. And here's to 20 years of helping us help others. Vodacom, power to you.
SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Welcome back. Very good morning once again. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Now, the scramble for Africa's riches is a story we are all too familiar with. Ever since the era of the pharaohs, our continent's cotton, rubber, ivory and mineral resources have lured explorers and conquerors from all over the world. Now, as the lure of Africa's riches remains as strong as ever, well-known author Martin Meredith looks at how new players like China have entered the field. Meredith, who's with us, is also the author of Diamonds, Gold and War and Mandela biography. He joins us today to talk about his new book, this one. It's called The Fortunes of Africa. Very good morning to you, Mr. Meredith. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Fortunes of Africa. You've written extensively about Africa. What is being revealed in this book?
What I've tried to do is kind of trace the various themes of African history, going back over kind of 5,000 years. And what is interesting about such research is the parallels that have existed over going back kind of thousands of years between the original kind of scramble for Africa's riches and what goes on today. Today the scramble really is for oil and for land in particular because of food insecurity problems that the world is facing.
Now, in the book, you really go back again to the very beginning of Africa's trade relations with the wider world. Why was this important in the context of today?
In the context of today, it's that Africa is one of the richest continents in the world in terms of its resources, particularly its mineral resources, whether that's oil, iron ore, bauxite, diamonds, gold. Because of the burgeoning industrialization of the world, in particular kind of China's role in that, it's become, Africa's resources have become even more important assets that the rest of the world wants to get its hands on.
You mentioned China, and we are made aware of it in the media almost daily here in South Africa and the wider world. Barack Obama, when he came to South Africa earlier last year, he spoke about the threat of exporting Africa's wealth to China and getting very little in return for that. How do you view that?
Oh, I don't think that's a true reflection of what's going on. It's an American perspective, if you like. China has invested heavily in Africa, and on very favourable terms on the whole. It's built roads and railways and ports and put up football stadiums. Its aim is entirely kind of commercial. It has no kind of political imperative. It wants to get its hands on Africa's mineral resources, and in return it does long-term deals which involve the construction of roads and railways and other kind of projects. So there are downsides to kind of China's involvement in Africa, but on the whole the balance sheet at the moment is that Africa's rise as a world economic power is to Africa's advantage rather than disadvantage.
China talks about multipolarity as its view of a future world. They want a world where power is not just vested in one place, as we see at the moment in America, but in various places around the world. What do you make of the emergence of the BRICS bloc, for instance, in recent times, where we see closer relations between Asia, Africa, the likes of Russia and Brazil?
Well, that's China's rather benign interpretation of its own activity. China quite openly wants to become the most influential foreign power in Africa, and it's going a long way to succeed in that ambition. It is already displacing, if you like, the influence that a number of Western governments, former colonial powers, and the United States have. I don't think that new economic blocs like BRICS that you mentioned have very much kind of influence in the way that world trade will develop. But certainly the impact that China has made on the quantity of African trade and Africa's trade with the rest of the world is quite a significant development.
It's often positioned the next century here in South Africa as the African century, in the way that Africa is expected to boom in the next decade, and then for the decades after that. 6 of the fastest growing economies on the planet right now are in Africa. Do you share that view, that very positive outlook for Africa?
No, it's not a realistic view. It's mainly kind of a slogan, this being Africa's century. And indeed, a turning point may have come in the last year. Africa thrives on its commodities that it exports to the rest of the world, and in particular oil. The boom in oil prices and other commodity prices during the 21st century has undoubtedly given a great boost to Africa's economy. But because they're heavily dependent on commodity prices, if the commodity prices start to slip, then Africa's prospects diminish with that. Now, the oil price has already fallen kind of steeply. Countries like Russia, for example, talk in terms of the hundreds of billions of dollars that they use every year. It's quite possible that as a result of the decline in the oil price, which is probably permanent, that Africa's fortunes have taken a fairly substantial knock. We won't know for another year or so as to how severe that setback is. But if, in fact, commodity prices are falling, in particular oil, then the sort of aggregate levels of Africa's economic development are not going to look that impressive.
The weaknesses for Africa then would be technology and manufacturing. Should that be a key focus in the next decade?
Africa can benefit from a whole range of new technologies, and there are indeed African countries like Kenya and South Africa itself, which is a sort of modern industrial state, has always been at the forefront of industrial development and manufacturing and so on. But the rest of Africa on the whole has failed to establish manufacturing industries. It is primarily, the whole continent is primarily dependent on kind of commodity exports, and that is a huge limitation on its economic prospects.
Times have changed. The outlook seems to have changed. Or rather, what has stayed the same in the way that Africa does business today?
What has stayed the same over 5,000 years, which is the period kind of my book covers, is that Africa is blessed with most extraordinary diverse range of resources, natural resources, mineral resources and so on, and agricultural land. The scramble for those resources has been going on over kind of 5,000 years, and the scramble is still going on now. It's a question of that Africans haven't yet managed, apart from South Africa, I would suggest, but elsewhere they haven't yet managed to capture that for their own benefit. They are still in thrall, if you like, to foreign investors, foreign adventurers, and people with ambitions like China.
Well, just quickly before you go, so where can South Africans find your book?
They can find it in all good bookshops, particularly, I'm told, exclusive books, where it retails for 320 Rand.
South African rand, that is. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Martin Meredith, who's the author of this wonderful book, The Fortunes of Africa, a 5,000-year tale. It's a very interesting read and one that I will delve into over the next week or so. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Meredith.
It's been a pleasure.
There you have the scramble for Africa's riches. Go and have a look-see for yourself in all good bookstores, as Mr. Meredith just told us. Now, we move on. More than 3 years ago, the South African Medical Journal published an editorial concerning the legality of psychoactive substances, such as marijuana, by its former managing editor, Professor J.P. van Niekerk. He states that it has been proven that the war on drugs has failed and that it's about time South Africa reopens the debate on the decriminalization of these substances and reconsiders its policies. Now, today, we are fortunate to be joined from Cape Town by Professor J.P. van Niekerk to continue what is now known as the #Dagga debate for those of you that are very tech-savvy right here on Newsroom. Very good morning to you, Professor van Niekerk. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Decriminalizing cannabis has been spoken about for years. Yes, there is Mario Ambrosini's Medical Innovation Bill on the table now in Parliament. But do you think there's still a lack of progress regarding this issue or even debate here in South Africa?
Well, in fact, South Africa is moving, but I think it's moving in the wrong direction when it talks about the decriminalization of the use of marijuana for medical purposes only. The world is, in fact, changing, and we need to take cognizance of what's happening elsewhere in the world and take action ourselves in a different direction, I believe.
Let's talk about how harmful cannabis is, and I'm sure something you are very familiar with. Drugs are regulated according to classification systems that purport to relate to the harms and risks of each drug. But it's been found this classification of drugs at times is unscientific, unsystematic and arbitrary. Is that accurate?
Yes, it's accurate that the international classification that's accepted by the anti-drug and war on drugs lobby is arbitrary and is unscientific. For instance, when you look at the classification of drugs on scientific grounds, on the harm it does to the person, to their family, or to the society, then in fact drugs which are not regarded in that international classification as dangerous, alcohol and cigarettes, are in fact in the top section of dangerous drugs to people and to society, whereas marijuana in fact is much less dangerous than those two legal drugs.
Why is it then that these substances that cause the most damage, like alcohol, cigarettes and prescription medication, are so easily accessible to all people in society today?
Well, the society, particularly in the United States during the Prohibition days of alcohol, tried to ban the use of alcohol, but it was a resounding failure, and so then alcohol became accepted but regulated, and likewise with cigarettes. If one legalizes, you must also regulate. So where cigarettes, for instance, were 50% of people in the United States were addicted to cigarettes, today it's only 20%. And that was caused by increasing the price of cigarettes and also making it socially unacceptable. So there are methods of regulating all drugs, and I think that that's the way in which we should be moving.
Professor van Niekerk, you talk about the cannabis measures we have in place in South Africa now being counterproductive. Why do you say that?
Well, the worldwide evidence is that criminalizing people and putting them in jail because they use drugs is likely to make them hardened criminals rather than to reform them. And so a measure of the success or otherwise of the war on drugs is the size of your prison population. The country which is the most vociferous in its war on drugs, the United States, has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of its prison population, and that's largely due to their war on drugs. So that's one measure. The other measure would be something like homicide rates in the world. In the UK and other Western countries, homicide rates about 1 per 100,000 per year. In the United States, that's 5 times that. In the countries that in fact are the conduits for the drugs going to the United States, like Mexico, it's many, many times that of the United States. Today, the world leader in homicides is Honduras, and that's, again, because it's a conduit for the drugs going to the United States and elsewhere. So those are just 2 examples of the harms. But there are farmers who have no other means of support, who grow crops like marijuana or cocoa, and their lives have been devastated by the war on drugs, and there are better ways of dealing with that.
Professor, finally, what about drug abuse and the way that we approach drug abuse here in South Africa and globally. Do we require a rethink around that?
I think that South Africa has a good view about the treatment of drug abuse. I think that it requires more resources, and I think by taking the use of drugs out of the criminal arena and making it a social and public health issue would be much more helpful, so that in fact education and rehabilitation become a much more important part of that, and all over it's been shown that that is the way to go.
Professor J.P. van Niekerk, thank you very much for joining us and giving us your insightful views on the war against drugs, the former managing editor of the South African Medical Journal. That's Professor J.P. van Niekerk coming to us live from Cape Town. Time for us to have a look at what you're talking about at SABC Newsroom on Twitter. That's where we love your comments, we love your pictures. SABC Newsroom, hard to believe that some silly people still think that dagga is the devil's lettuce. Get real. Hashtag dagga debate says below the lion. Just in. ZAR says SABC Newsroom, dagga debate. Commercializing industrial hemp can create jobs. An industry worth billions. Yes, that is a view held by many experts that we've had on the show. Johan says, dagga debate, just legalize it. It's never going to stop selling on the streets. Oh, we've missed the third one there, that one from Johan. But let's move on and take a look at what's happening on Newsroom's Facebook page. Today you'll see there that more than 2,000 National Guardsmen have been deployed to Ferguson, Missouri in the aftermath of Monday night's rampage, resulting from a grand jury decision not to indict a white police officer in the fatal shooting of a young black man by the name of Michael Brown. Meanwhile, the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has urged protesters in Ferguson and elsewhere in the United States to refrain from violence. Back home here in South Africa, you'll see municipal by-elections are set to take place today in 8 provinces, with 81 candidates contesting 31 wards. You can find all of those stories and more on Newsroom's Facebook page. Of course, sabc.co.za/news. That's where you get all the latest updates from all the ranging stories from all around the world. You're watching Newsroom. We'll be back after a short little break.
You can't have a gut feeling about other people's gut feeling.
Ngaba has continued the tradition of passing stories onto the next generation using a platform that offers stories to a far more greater audience.
Zombie no go unless you tell them to go.
This is what the audiences all over the world knew Fela Kuti for.
Join Musam Khalifi on Afro Showbiz every Saturday at 19:30 CAT.
Right.
Well, hello and welcome back here with Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just take a look at the top stories this morning. Public Enterprises Minister Lynn Brown says a plan is in the making for Eskom's financial and operational recovery. Brown says Eskom and others will be required to make an extraordinary effort over the next 3 to 4 years. New Eskom CEO Tsediso Matona says the power utility is facing a crisis. Announcing interim financial results, he said profit for the 6 months to September declined to 9.3 billion rand from 12.2 billion last year. Municipal by-elections are taking place across the country today. 81 candidates will contest 31 wards. IEC officials have been collecting special votes from the sick and elderly ahead of today's voting. Nearly 500,000 voters are registered in the 633 voting districts involved today. And Palestinian lobby groups have called on the South African government to join the global campaign for a boycott and trade sanctions against Israel. The call has been made ahead of the meeting between President Jacob Zuma and his Palestinian counterpart Mahmoud Abbas at the Union Buildings in Pretoria this morning. Abbas is on his first state visit to South Africa, a trip which will culminate in the signing of a key bilateral agreement to bolster political ties between Palestine and South Africa. Now remember, all those top stories and more are available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Yeben, over to you.
Thank you. As the year comes to an end now, many corporates are starting to think about where to put their corporate social investment allocation in the new financial year. According to reports, South African corporates spent almost 8 billion rand on corporate social investment last year. On the other hand, funding for non-profit organisations is drying up, with almost 40% of South African NPOs operating on less money than they've had previously. Well, today from Cape Town, we are joined by Neil Robinson, the Chief Executive Officer of Relate Bracelets, a 100% not-for-profit social enterprise. A very good morning to you, Neil. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, hi, Eben. Morning to the viewers.
Neil, I understand you used to be a corporate man yourself, but you became more interested in CSI. Is that accurate? And just tell us your story.
Yeah, absolutely. I spent 23 years in sort of corporate mainstream commercial businesses, and in the last 6 months or so I decided a change is necessary, and I joined a company called Relate in sort of March this year. And, you know, what a wonderful change. It's very different. You certainly don't get the money flowing that you do in corporate, but certainly from feeling good about what you do, it makes a hellish difference to know that you're actually changing the lives of a few people, thousands, hopefully millions, as you go around your sort of daily business. So a big change, but you know, we run the company very similar to what a corporate is run by, should I say. The rigor, the strategy, the process that goes into a corporate, we pretty much use in the NPO space, and I'm loving what I'm doing. It's a change, but it's great.
Now, Neil, NPOs are getting less money, but we're still spending the 8 billion. The numbers don't quite add up to me. Is it a scenario where corporates are losing faith that the money they're sending out for corporate social investment is not reaching the needy, but instead is paying for management and salaries?
Yeah, listen, I think there's a number of issues. I think there's some corporates who do it very well. I mean, Nedbank, Vodacom, Protea Hotels, they've got really good sort of sustainable systems going in their CSI programs, because they look at it like a normal business function, like you would operations, marketing, strategy, supply chain issues, and they measure it properly. So your metrics are important. You know, when you start something at day dot, you want to see some benefits, 20 years down the line. It's not a case of throwing some money at something and hoping it sticks. You've got to have a plan, you've got to have a system, you've got to have a process, and you've got to have proper, rigorous measurements as to, if you put someone through an education program, where do you see that going? It's not about a year, 2 years. No. It's a 12-year process. When someone starts school, that's your metric. Did they do well? Didn't they do well? So I think corporates are finding, if you measure it, they're putting more money behind it. But I think 8 billion sounds like a lot of money, but it's not. It's a small drop in the ocean. Yeah. I think government does a lot, but at the same time, corporate have got to come to the party, especially big organised corporates, if some of our major challenges in this country is going to be sorted out, because there are many, many challenges, as we all know.
Now you're the CEO of Relate Bracelets, a 100% not-for-profit organisation. Tell us about Relate Bracelets and then the work that you guys do.
So we have a very simple model. A third of our money goes to good sort of causes like cancer, the Amy Beale Foundation, Ikamvela Bantu, places like that, where we give money away. The second third goes to our gogos in the townships who make our bracelets. And out of that, we actually put some money towards enterprise development as well as skills development funds. And then we have young, unemployed youth that make our bracelets, finish them off and pack them and ship them. And obviously we have running costs as well, which makes up the other third of our business. But the business is simply run by, we make bracelets, we sell bracelets in retail. We've raised to date 22 million rand in 4 years. The trust was started in 2010. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we've sold about just close to 1.4 million bracelets to date. And, you know, people often say, you know, how can I give back? What can I do, etc. And, you know, a bracelet costs 35 rand. Most people can afford it, if you're an employed South African. And, you know, by doing such a little, you know, a lot gets changed. So, you know, we found it's a sustainable model. It's measurable. And we've got great corporate and retail partners, which obviously help us with our business strategy.
Neil, thank you very much. You guys are doing fantastic work at Relate Bracelets. It's something that we should all support here in South Africa. That's where we wrap it today. Go out, buy a Relate bracelet. Go out and show the world you've got a Relate bracelet. We have to relate to each other. We have to show a little bit more compassion and a little bit more love to each other. Well, time for us to wrap it here. Newsroom is broadcast live, of course, from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon with a total rebroadcast the following morning at 5 a.m. We're also streaming live, of course, on YouTube at this very moment. And then you can watch back on demand a little bit later if that is what you want to do. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.